Narativ is funded by viewers like you. Support our independent journalism at patreon.com/narrative.
Is it possible that we did not know this, that our intelligence agencies, our intelligence leadership, I'm not saying throughout, because it's very complex and big and bureaucratic, is it possible that someone who has been working with Russian intelligence officers for that long, for decades, was unknown, that there wasn't at least a file on this guy?
Well, some people, I certainly talked to retired CIA people who did think this was happening. Among them in my book is a guy named Glenn Carl, who around 2015 started, his hair was on fire, and he started trying to he figured out enough to figure roughly something like this was going on, and he tried to alert the authorities. And I think it became clear. I mean, if you go back to the early 90s when it started, I mean, there were also both FBI and KGB people saying we didn't know what to do once the Soviet Union folded. So we didn't know, are they our friends now, our enemies? What should we do? And the CIA sort of took several steps back and stopped being truly attentive, and so did the FBI. I mean, you also had 9/11 in 2001, which just all the enormous amount of the FBI rather switched its focus dramatically there. And I think it was 1991, then Attorney General William Barr took 300 FBI agents who were onto the Russian mafia and transferred them to the crack cocaine epidemic. So there were political factors, some of which seemed legitimate. But when I talked to FBI counterintelligence people, they said they didn't know who was our enemy, what they should do, or anything. There was no real direction there. You also, and I've reported this before. No, I was just going to say that, I mean, when the fact you have former FBI directors like William Sessions who end up being the attorney for Simeon Mogilevich, I mean, that sends a message to people working at the FBI, and it's not a good one. It's not a good one at all.
I'm dying to talk about Hansen.
In your book.
We're running out a little bit short. Go ahead, LB. Sorry.
Okay, I just want to get this. Craig has a great passage in his book where you talk about, and I think Yuri, you informed on this as well, the explosion of Soviet assets running around after the fall of the Soviet Union. That we actually had an explosion here, and shifting all those resources made it impossible to track all the folks that were running around, which leads into the Hansen piece, which was a revelation for me, Craig. I've done a lot on Hansen, and I think you brought something new to light in your book around him.
Well, thank you.
This is a segue.
I mean, part of the thing with Hansen was during when he was, doing a lot of his spying, William Barr was Attorney General. This is back in '91 under the presidency of George H.W. Bush. And I found it just fascinating that one of our speechwriters, who I communicated with a lot, was Father John Paul Woke, who was in Opus Dei and who happened to be the brother-in-law of Robert Hansen himself. Mm-hmm. And during that period, Barr promoted Hansen twice while he was spying. And even during that period, another brother-in-law of Hansen's, Mark Woke, who was in the FBI, really kind of figured out that his brother-in-law, Robert Hansen, was the Soviet mole that everyone was looking for.
So Barr covered up for Hansen, who was a Russian spy.
Well, I'm not sure I'd use the word cover up. I mean,
yeah. Promoted
I think
with knowledge.
He promoted him, absolutely, yeah.
Hmm. And this is from the guy that,
And he had knowledge?
Wait, I'm sorry?
I want to land that a little bit. And he had knowledge at the time, Craig.
No, I don't know that. I don't know
Okay.
that he acknowledged, but it was very, very close to him. And his own Hanson's brother-in-law was his speechwriter, and it was a small circle of friends.
You also tie this all into Opus Dei, which is a very, it's a long chapter we probably can't get into now, but everyone needs to read this book because this is probably the most fascinating part for me because I know some of the Trump stuff. This stuff about Opus Dei and Barr and Hansen is so deep and interesting because we don't think of Opus Dei as being part of this, of the Trump presidency per se and how it got there. And we certainly don't think about it as being part of the turning of our judicial system into a right-wing or more right-wing or how would you say it, more extreme judicial system. And yet Opus Dei, through your research, seems to be central to all of that.
Well, it's very authoritarian, and it seems to run parallel to the idea of an imperial presidency and Barr's notion that enabled Trump and expanded his powers enormously. I kept looking for direct ties to Russia, and I really didn't find them that directly speaking, but certainly in the last 2 years, a lot of the most powerful lawyers, among them people who work at Kirkland and Ellis and ended up in the Barr Justice Department, many of them had represented the top Soviet oligarchs. The same for Jones Day. So you see this in tremendous concentration of power. And when Barr became Attorney General, the entire Justice Department was overrun with these people. And you would see them on both sides of various controversies. That is, these same lawyers were both prosecuting and defending Jeffrey Epstein, which is one reason he got that extraordinary sweetheart deal from Alex Acosta.
That's incredible. And the tie-in between Epstein and Trump is really fascinating. And again, I'm not sure we have enough time, but I'm really curious to know what you think the basis of that relationship was. Was it just a fun party buddies, or is there more to it?
I think it was young girls. I think they were both frauds of a very different kind. I mean, they were. Trump was from Queens. Epstein from Brooklyn, from an even more modest family than Trump's, of course. But they saw themselves a bit as outsiders trying to make it in Manhattan. When Epstein got together with Ghislaine, suddenly he could be fitted with the right clothing. He could learn how to give cocktail parties, all the social stuff. And they loved palling around like that. And they really had quite a bitter falling out about 15 years later, around 2002 or 2003, when they fought over a property that eventually went to the Russian oligarch, forgive me, I hate pronouncing Russian names. Yes. And Epstein was very, very angry. And after that, he was showing around a photo of Trump with two young girls who were half naked, and there was sort of an embarrassing stain on Trump's trousers, that was suggestive.
So this goes right to the heart of QAnon. I mean, it's just kind of amazing that we're going there. I mean, I'm sorry, I'm trying maybe covering too much territory, but does go to the fact that both too much, slow down maybe, but it does go to the heart of that.
Yeah.
Was Donald Trump?
Everything needs a pause of just like, let's take it in. Let's take it in.
It's a lot going on here.
Jeffrey Epstein had Kompromat on Donald Trump.
Mm-hmm.
I know you're watching the clock, but the clock. It's okay. Jeffrey Epstein had Kompromat on Donald Trump, and Donald Trump, quite possibly, there's a suggestion in your book, and we've talked about this excerpt. I don't know if you caught Greg Olear's piece, but he wrote about it, Craig, of that possibly Trump to kind of this fight that maybe he informed on Epstein a little bit. Maybe he was the one that tipped people off, or no?
Well, I think Epstein felt that way. I don't have hard evidence of it, but I think Epstein felt that way, and that was one reason. I got the impression when he was showing that photo around that there was an implicit threat that he may have dirt on Donald Trump and he may pull the plug if necessary, but he never did.
Did they, they had videotapes of everybody, they claimed, at least Ghislaine and Jeffrey Epstein claimed. Is that potentially some of the compromat that Russia has
well, that brings up
Trump?
That brings up the saga of John Mark Dugan, who was in the Palm Beach Sheriff's Department when they were investigating Epstein around 2005. And one of the investigators could see the pressure coming down on the investigation. So he gave a small vault to Dugan for safekeeping that contained, Dugan told me, 478 DVDs that were apparently sexual compromise.
And this is now in the hands of the Russians, presumably.
Well, Dugan suddenly he was being chased by the FBI. Remember, he'd been a cop, and he somehow gets across the border. This is his story, as he told me in a phone interview, and some of it was reported, by the way, in the Daily Beast, which did a very good job on this. And then he flies to Moscow, and I think it was 3 or 4 days after his arrival. And I should say Dugan sort of reminds me a bit of a character in an Elmore Leonard book. He's sort of he's not someone you would rely on completely, and he's not at all high ranking. I'm trying to be polite here, but he ends up in Moscow, and this seems like an exfiltration in a way. And 3 or 4 days after his arrival, I have a picture of him with a man named Pavel Borodin, and who is a rich and Yuri can speak to this. But if someone with no credentials arrives in Russia, how likely, tell them who Borodin is and what that means.
Borodin is a billionaire. He was the guy who brought Putin to Kremlin. He was his first employer in Moscow. He was the guy who arranged the first big money laundering operation, which embroiled even the Yeltsin's family, where Borodin, through his foreign business contact, they gave Yeltsin's family credit cards, and it was a big international investigation. And it's not incidental that Putin became Yeltsin's successor because he was involved in all this dirty operation. This operation involved American financial assistance to Russia, because President Clinton came with official visit to Moscow, and Yeltsin brought him to recently renovated Kremlin's palace, and it was gold gleaming all over the place. It was so impressive that President Clinton was like, wow, and these are the people who are asking us for financial assistance. So they embezzled hundreds of millions of dollars.
Unbelievable.
As a reward for this, Borodin was appointed the secretary of a union state. Russia actually is a union state between Russia and Belarus. And he was the secretary. So basically he was higher than Putin and Lukashenko. And he meets imagine that this is how Dugan explained that Borodin and this cop from Florida, they met each other in the Facebook. This is a funny.
No, it's true. And I reached Dugan and I reached Dugan in Moscow.
Strangers in the night found themselves.
So go ahead, Craig.
It is almost absolute indication, a clear indication that the cop was met with embrace in Moscow, and all these tapes are in
so there are tapes potentially
hands of the FSB.
So all those tapes of all these famous people, including possibly Donald Trump, is sitting there in somewhere in Putin's orbit in the Kremlin.
By the way, I did see one tape. Dugan showed me one. And I should say it was black and white, very grainy. I'm not going to say the name. He identified the man, or said he did. I could not confirm the identity. But it was an executive in New York who made a lot of money, but his name wouldn't excite a lot of people.
But still, the fact that the tapes exist, and exist in that orbit is certainly helpful to at least support the idea of Kompromat. Sorry, go ahead, LB.
Absolutely.
No, I just excites me. So, because then I go away, especially if it's a banker, then I go digging in their money, and that's what I love to do more than anything.
Yuri,
Through all that dirty money.
so we've got this guy, Donald Trump is not going away. He seems to want to stick around. He seems to have an army that he's developed. He's got a disinformation campaign that's bamboozled half of America into believing falsehoods. Some of that knowledge and technology must come out of Russia, or at least outside of this country. And he seems to be hell-bent on starting some sort of movement, whatever that might mean, as sort of a separatist, maybe insurgent, who knows what it is, entity, like a second presidency almost in this country. Is this in the realm of what Russia would have planned for Trump, or is he just freelancing?
With my career, I know for sure that you cannot plan any operation for 40 years. Mm-hmm. And it is difficult to plan anything at all in this world. And if you plan operation, it should be the simplest operation as possible. 2-3 steps ahead, that's it. Otherwise, you go nowhere. It just happened. It happened. The Russians, they had in their modus operandi, they seem to recruit so-called prospective agents. Like in the heydays of the KGB, in the late 30s, they recruited 5 students in Cambridge, in England, which later became the top guys in British intelligence, in royal family, etc., etc. And it became like a textbook for the KGB modus operandi. So this is in their culture. They cannot wait. No problem with this. They can develop for years. They can develop for decades. It's not a big expense actually for them. Nothing to be, no reason to hurry. But sometimes it happens.
But this is a playbook we've seen before from the Kremlin. We've seen this sort of playbook in Africa and other places where these leaders set themselves up as sort of, factions or separatist entities, and they, for whatever reason, often money, often resources, often commodity. This is part of the playbook of what Russia does around the world.
I sometimes think that the biggest mistake of the Soviet leadership was that they focused on missiles, on nukes to threaten the West. Had they focused on corruption, it would have been cheaper for them to influence.
Maybe they did. Maybe they did focus on corruption.
And it's a big question who would have won the Cold War, Because what scares me right now is the process I called Schröderization of Western political elite. Schröderization comes from word Schröder. This is former Chancellor of Germany, who became Putin's, who became Gazprom employee several days after he stepped down from his position of Chancellor of Germany, meaning that the talks with him about taking employment with Gazprom were underway when he was still the chancellor. So it looks like this is a widespread modus operandi by the Kremlin, and it has penetrated Europe, it has penetrated UK, and as we can see, it has been penetrating in political elite of this country as well. And this is the biggest national security threat that I can see for this country.
Is leaders being co-opted into Russian companies or into what exactly is that threat? Can you identify it more clearly?
They corrupt leaders. They corrupt politicians.
Yeah.
Right. I would add. I would add that this is, that this really is a war of sorts, and it's one without bombs, bullets, or boots on the ground. And instead, it's corruption, it's cyber warfare, it's disinformation, and it's been enormously effective. Unbelievably effective. Putin says again and again that American democracy is corrupt. Well, now at least 70 million people or so in America believe that, and we did it ourselves in a way, with a lot of prodding from them. But this is not going away entirely with Donald Trump. That's for sure. I mean, I think Biden's victory was a very important victory. But if you look at the Republican Party today, to me, it's like the party of regions in Ukraine, and they're just puppets for Russia.
It looks like that. Is that the case, Yuri?
Yep.
Well, I wouldn't say the whole party is a puppet of Russia, but the penetration into the Republican Party, I believe it's a real issue. It's a big issue, like penetration of the Russian intelligence community into the Conservative Party in Great Britain is huge, just huge.
So this is going to be. Go ahead.
No, it's just also sort of invisible. I mean, no one seems to really care that, I mean, to take one of many, many examples, that someone like Leonard Blavatnik can give tens of millions of dollars to the Republican Party because he's both a Russian oligarch and he's a naturalized U.S. citizen. And there are hundreds of loopholes like that they can drive a truck through to corrupt people. Yuri actually testified about the danger of this before the United States Congress in 1999, more than 20 years ago. So we could see Russian money was coming in.
And it is a global problem, as you point out. Is there a possibility that the world will finally coalesce and at least confront Putin or whoever follows him with sanctions that are really meaningful?
Well, I believe this is a high time. It's a must, because it reminds me, growingly reminds me, the early 30s in Europe, in Germany, was well-known political leader of the 30s in Germany. It's high time to respond to Putin, and it's not difficult. It is not difficult. The Russian economy is a lousy shape. The social tension is growing. Putin is losing it. The only thing which is required, actually, is political will in this country and in Western Europe. And this is what is missing, to my amazement. Just recently, 2 days ago, European Union discussed the recent poisoning of Navalny in Russia, his subsequent incarceration, etc. No decision whatsoever. It was explained that, well, no one proposed anything, therefore we didn't make any decision. But it's just pathetic.
In fact, there was a call.
The strategy to.
Sorry, keep going. Sorry.
Yeah, there were calls from separate states, but when it came to discuss this on podium, it was explained that there was no specific proposal. I believe the strategy towards Putin is simple. It's based in the criminal law, which says, at least in Russian criminal law, which says that the best prevention of future crimes is to make the crime punishable. He commits the crime, he must be punished. If he poisons Skripal, Litvinenko, he goes unpunished. He will poison another one. He is not punished, he will poison another one. He used chemical weapons in his country. He hasn't been punished. He will use these chemical weapons in other country. And it's a reality. It's going to be worse until he is confronted. And to confront him, it doesn't require using nukes. It doesn't require using armed forces. What is required is sanctions. Sanctions which were embedded into the law over the preceding 4 years by mostly by the House of Representatives.
And this includes sanctions against Abramovich, right? So that's the big call right now. Is that Navalny's people are saying...
Abramovich, yes. Deripaska should be sanctioned back again, because this is one of the key tools of the Kremlin, Deripaska and his Rusal company.
Yes.
So it's simple. What is needed is political will.
So these are basically the Magnitsky sanctions. These are the things that could possibly stop Putin now. And Trump, how do we approach Trump, knowing what you know about him, and with your KGB learning and knowledge? How would you tackle someone like Trump to get him off the stage for American politics?
Well, I believe he has lost it. He made a mistake. And Putin in Kremlin made a mistake. Because had Trump left his position peacefully without what happened on January the 6th, he could have continued his political activity, rocking the boat in this country for 4 more years, extending his political base, and maybe coming back in 4 years as an yet again as a candidate of for the presidency. But now, after he had done in January 6th, I believe his chances for a comeback or efficiently rocking the boat in favor of Russia over the next 4 years are pretty much limited. Therefore, his usefulness for the Kremlin is not big anymore. Besides, as I said, there is a transition in power. Putin is losing it. So let me say it this way, Trump's handler in Kremlin is about to retire. Well,
right. You know, Hillary Clinton
who will be the next one?
Hillary Clinton had an interesting tweet the other day, and she said someone has to figure out if Trump was in touch with Putin just before the insurrection on January 6th.
Oh, yeah. That's interesting.
I don't know the answer. Yeah.
It'd be really interesting to find out. Go ahead, LB.
I just want to say, you guys, my phone has been blowing up, and I'm also paying attention to the comments, trying to catch them. And you're a hit. Everybody has a tremendous amount of questions and things that they want to keep talking to you about. It's sort of galvanizing everybody. So I wanted to let you both know that, and hopefully we can continue this conversation. Maybe a little bit more right now, but also, Yuri, it'd be wonderful to have you back. Craig, you know how I feel about you. I'll run through a New York parade to get to you. So,
there is so much still to cover.
There's so much to cover still that we haven't had a chance, but I just want to let you guys know and let the audience know who's watching. We see everything you're saying. I'm trying to track you, but, we're going to try to keep following up and thank everyone for being so engaged and involved. And stop texting me now. That's okay. My phone's blowing up.
Yeah, thank you very much for everyone who's been putting in those comments. Craig, as we try to wrap up tonight, and I really do hope you guys can come back for another show, is there what are the takeaways? What are you taking away from this incredible book, by the way? This is a must read for anyone who likes even closely. I love the stuff. So for me, it was like, I have to read it. And I literally read it all in a day because it's so good. But it's a really terrific read. And every American should pick this up. And if you know somebody who has any doubts about who Donald Trump is, this book puts those to rest very quickly. It's a remarkable book, American Kompromat, by Craig Unger. It's really a must read. It's a terrific thing that you've produced here. What's your big takeaway from it?
Well, I think we're still at war, as I said, and I characterize it, and I think one chapter of it may almost be over, as the Biden victory was very big, very important. I think the first week of the administration has been great, but he's ruling by his majorities in both houses are razor thin, and if the Democrats were to lose the House in the next election, he would be completely powerless. So this isn't over yet, and it seems to me you have a new generation who will be fighting to take Trump's place. Such wonderful people as Josh Hawley, Ted Cruz, Tucker Carlson, and we'll have to see what happens. But I think the Democrats have to crush them, and Trump has to be fully prosecuted as much as possible so the truth will come out. I mean, there's so much that needs to happen. I mean, if you look at social media, it has to be regulated. Facebook has made billions over just putting out Russian propaganda. So there's so much that can be done. I could go on and on forever.
Yeah. It really has been the most remarkable story. LB, any final thoughts from you?
I wanted to say this to Craig, just back on the Hansen thing, because I didn't get to, and as a thought for why people need to pick up this book and read this book. Two reasons. One, if you want this kind of journalism to continue, you need to buy books like this and support. I know what Craig does, his process, how hard he works, how deep he goes, what it takes out of him. And, you know, let's support this. These are the books to buy. These are the journalists whose books you buy, not the ones that get the fancy TV shows or whatever. Bless them. But this is the real stuff. So, you know, one, that's why everyone should buy this book immediately. And as you said, Zev, buy it for everybody that you know, so you can hand this to him. But the other thing is, just as an example of what the book can do for even people who are really informed on all this stuff, is it really shifted my thinking on Robert Hanssen, or expanded it, because I had never considered that. And you brought it out in the book of like, well, he was in there during a time where also he could have allowed something like the cultivation of a very prominent asset like Donald Trump to go unnoticed. You know,
Absolutely.
Donald had help at the highest levels of the FBI by a KGB mole and every other KGB asset that was being cultivated during the time that Robert Hanssen was overseeing that. So
that's really a profound thought when you think about it. I mean,
and I had only thought about Hanssen as being someone who was compromising us and our operations to the KGB, and not really someone who actually was providing cover as well, and could provide the kind of cover that he could have provided for people like Donald Trump, for the KGB's assets over here.
Who better to put in charge of keeping Russian Americans from spying from the Russians than Robert Hanssen?
Wow. Yeah, exactly. You know? Incredible. Is the Cold War over, Yuri?
It never stopped for Russians, at least. What amazes me with Americans, I love America. I love Americans. They're very nice people, but sometimes too nice. When President Bush, father, said after collapse of the Soviet Union, ladies and gentlemen, the Cold War is over. Now we are friends. We are cooperating. And American administration jumped into the cooperation with the Russian government. Here the Russians understood we can play with these guys. And they've been playing since the collapse of the Soviet Union. They never stopped the Cold War. It was like a temporary recess for them. It's kind of in their culture. They don't believe in win-win situation. They believe that there are some nasty forces out there who want to destroy Russia. And you cannot just believe that you will nice talk with them will make them their friends. I know for sure I was inside the Russian intelligence, Soviet intelligence agency, where I realized how to influence them. It was early days of Reagan administration, when after lengthy talk, trying to ask Soviets to remove their medium-range missiles targeting Western Europe, when all these lengthy talks ended with nothing, President Reagan deployed Pershing II and cruise missiles. The people in Kremlin next morning woke up and realized that Pershing flies to Kremlin about 10 minutes. That's it. They sober up overnight. They became reasonable people you could negotiate with. So this is, if you want to ensure security and good relations with Russia, you need to keep the fist right next to their nose, because this is the only thing they realize. It's not because the Russian people are such, but this is kind of weird thing, the negative selection of elite. So the worst people usually have the trend to go to the very top and take the leading position in their country. And this is what makes the problem.
Well, let's leave it there.
Again, the negative, I just want that phrase again, the negative what of the elite?
The negative people in the elite.
The negative selection of elite, where the worse you are, the more chances you have to go to the very top. This is the way it is. They call it, it's a popular term, they call it negative selection of personnel.
Is that true for everywhere, or just you're talking specifically about Russia?
I think it was true of the Trump administration.
The former Soviet Union. I would say this is the former Soviet Union.
Okay.
This is the former Soviet Union because the bosses in Russia, they pick up assistants by one criteria, the top criteria. How much compromat I have on this guy. The more compromat I have, the more reliable this guy will be with me. So the more compromat, the better it is for the government. And this is the way they,
That's the way they do things. Well, the book is called American Kompromat. I highly recommend everyone read it for those very good reasons that Yuri just explained. It is how Russia operates, but it's also a very, very great book about how Donald Trump was cultivated by the KGB. Narativ is funded by viewers like you. Support our independent journalism at patreon.com/narrative.